Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. Andrea, Andree joining us here today. So excited to help you out there. Yes, moms, we're talking about you. Andrea's here with her own company, and she's going to discuss a little bit about what she does and her website. Check it out. It's her name, spelled Andrea, ANDREE.com. So tell us a little bit about what you do because, yeah, having kids is a hard thing. Then what
Yes.
happens after that? But we need sometimes a support group and some people to help us. And I know you're one of those people who are overly qualified.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Thanks, Jill. And it's great to be back. As Jill mentioned, I'm a mom. So I have two young kids, 6 and 4. And what really got me into coaching and supporting other moms was that I learned when my oldest was about 1 that I was very reactive to her, and I would yell and scream and just I would get these physical feelings in my body when she would do these things that didn't seem to merit a similar reaction. So as I learned and got into what drives our behaviors, I learned about this idea of empowerment. And so
Yep.
I use the Dr. David Hawkins definition of empowerment, which I can share my screen now that we're on video, Jill, and I can show
Please,
you
yeah,
a
and thank you because you
scale.
shared a lot last week. And as a mom of 5 and 7, absolutely. Why do we react this way? Yeah, there's a lot that goes
Yes.
into that. And we're going to get into that momentarily. But yes, let's walk
Yep.
down this road and this pace here. This is beautiful to
Hmm.
talk about exactly what empowerment is, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way I define empowerment, I use it from Dr. David Hawkins, Hawkins. He has this book called Power versus Force. And he's got this scale. At the bottom is 20, it goes up to 1,000. At the 700 to 1,000 level, he calls the level of enlightenment. At the bottom, at the 20 level, is shame. Then it goes up to guilt, apathy, etc. And so he defines the 200 level, which what he calls courage, as the initial level of empowerment. And so how he describes empowerment is when someone starts they have the willingness to stop blaming outside circumstances. They accept responsibility for their own actions, feelings, and beliefs. Otherwise, if they're projecting responsibility outside of themselves, then they remain in the powerless state of victimhood. And so how I started applying that to myself was I was noticing when I was reacting to my children. This was my main start, and I've used this in other areas of my life since then. But I would notice when I reacted to my children, and I started taking responsibility for that. I stopped blaming them for making me mad. I think a lot of us say, you made me mad, you did this, and I was upset. And I stopped blaming them, and I started looking within and understanding and learning, why was I reacting that way? What's behind the reactions? And so that's what got me into this space. And I'm here to help teach other moms these same techniques that I learned, and really take ownership of these things that are not me, these aspects that are not me, so that way I can make more space for what I consider the authentic me.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. My goodness. So,
Mm-hmm.
stop blaming, accept responsibility, say for actions, feelings, beliefs, and taking
Mm-hmm.
ownership and identifying really the parts that are not me and making the
Yes.
space for the authentic me.
Yes.
All right. So, what do you mean by the parts that really aren't you or aren't
The
me?
parts.
Yeah.
Yep. So I've got some props now. So I'll describe the props to those who are not on camera. But I like to think when I think of the human experience, who we are, I think of us as a mind, body, and a spirit. And so right now I've got an empty jar with a candle inside, and I don't have the candle lit because I'm not sure what would happen if I was playing with fire right now, trying to avoid any accidents. But what I think of is the flame inside of us being our spirit, the jar being our body, and then we've got our minds. And if we were in a perfect world, if we were acting as authentically us as possible, we would have this spirit come in with this energy, and it might say something like, you want to express through music. And then our mind would be on board, and our mind would say, all right, I'm a great musician. This is what I'm going to do. And then we would express music through our body. And so all of those parts would play in harmony together. But and so the parts that aren't me is anything that causes me to react, because spirit is actually, when we look talk about the scale of consciousness, spirit is very close to the top. So that love, joy, peace, energy, those are parts of spirit that connect all of us together. And so what I've learned to understand is if I have a reaction or a thought or a behavior that is not coming from those high vibrational places, then I consider that not me. I consider that something that we'll get into next, which is why I'm reacting. So,
Mm-hmm.
which I can jump into. So, with spirit being sort of that really kind, compassionate energy, what we run into instead, now I've got this jar full of rocks, and these rocks are energy that really blocks our spirit from expressing through our body. And so when we react, I think of it as we hit one of these energy blocks. The rocks are really these thoughts and emotions that are not us. They're these beliefs that we've grown up. These are the parts of us that we thought were true, that we have taken on as sort of our conditioned personality, but they're not our true personality. And so when someone or there's an external circumstance that resonates with one of these energy blocks, then it's painful in our body. We get that rush of reaction in our body that then causes us to want to yell, causes us to want to react. And so those are every time that happens to me, that's when I look inside, I understand what is the thought, what is the emotion driving the behavior, and then I work to overcome that.
Got it. And let me ask you you
Mhm.
talk about this. So in that jar, right? So rocks are
Mhm.
painful, react. What do you
Yep.
say when hit one? Yep.
Yep, yep, yep.
And what does it real each rock represent in a sense?
Mhm. Yeah, so I think of these rocks as being a blob of our our thoughts and emotions. And so let's think for a second when let's say you get embarrassed. How does that feel in
Hmm.
your body?
Oh, you get
Like,
flustered,
yeah.
you get that red face, you
Yeah.
get
Yeah, it
yeah.
doesn't feel good, right?
Hmm.
And so there's a feeling that it doesn't feel good. But the thing with energy and emotion is an energy. So think of it emotion, energy in motion. And that emotion, it wants to flow. When we were children, what happened often was at some point we felt an emotion that we didn't want to feel, and we sort of stopped that flow of emotion. And since it can't go anywhere, it stays in our body. And I think of it as it becomes this glob of emotion that becomes this energy block that gets in the way of us expressing our spirit. And then we build a belief system on top of it. So we'll talk about an example next,
Yeah.
but when that belief system gets, quote unquote, touched in a way by an external circumstance, it's like we're reigniting that emotional state and that emotional feeling in our body. It gives us that rush, it gives us that fluster feeling, it gives us that uncomfortable feeling because it's sort of there's something in our external world that has resonated with that block.
And now, would you mind showing us
Yeah,
an example in a sense,
yeah,
giving us an example about,
yeah.
these things happen in childhood, right?
Many of them happen in childhood, yes. And when we are kids, we are in a very illogical frame of mind. And so we're making these conclusions on the world that are probably not very accurate, but we're kids and we don't know any better. So let's just say hypothetically there's a child and there's something that they want to say and they're talking to their mom and they say mom, and mom looks at them and says, no, I'm sorry, not right now, I'm trying to put the baby to sleep, or something very neutral like that. Well, a kid, because not very they're not thinking very logically, they might feel sad, so there's that emotion that doesn't feel very good in their body, and then they might conclude something like, well, no one wants to hear what I have to say. And so there's that belief system that they build around that emotion. And so that stays in their energy body as a block. And let's say, for example, as they get older, a teacher might call on them and they might freeze because unconsciously in their head, they're running this program that says something like, well, no one wants to hear what I have to say. This isn't good. This is really unsafe. Why are they calling on me? No one wants to hear what I have to say. And so I think of it as when there's an event that hits one of those blocks and sort of resonates with one of those blocks, I think of it as like shaking a can of pop, a carbonated beverage, where it sort of expands in your body and it builds up that pressure. And what most of us do then is we want to yell, we want to get rid of the pressure any way we can. Um, and so we shove that emotion back down, we yell, whatever it is. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
It happens to all of us, and I
Yep.
apologize. I'm
Yep.
having a little bit of a coughing fit over
No,
here.
you're okay.
I'm going to keep my mic muted as I cough again. Would you mind
Okay, okay.
continuing?
Yep, yep. So the next piece would be, I'll speak for Jill. We've got notes for each other. Are we stuck with these rocks or
Thank you.
painful emotions forever? Yes. And so the good news is that we are not stuck with these forever. And so even though we might have suppressed them as children, or it could have been decades since we maybe started the emotion, the good thing is that we can end the cycle by, instead of when we feel it well up in our body, instead of trying to yell at somebody or instead of shoving it back down, if we just allow ourselves to feel it and allow it to flow, then we can end that cycle that we started all those years ago, which allows us to then take the rock, take the block out of our system and gives us space for our spirit to come back in. And so there's a really interesting statistic. So Jill Bolte Taylor is a neuroscientist, and she has said that if we would just feel our emotions for 60 to 90 seconds, if we would just allow ourselves to feel them, they would get out of our system. And then they wouldn't be here constantly bothering us, constantly rising to the surface every time something triggered them. But what most of us do is we ask, we change our external reality. We ask people to treat us different because we don't want to feel these emotions, that if we would just feel them for a minute and a half, then we wouldn't get so reactive, then they wouldn't bubble up every time that they were touched. And so what I suggest instead is, since to not be stuck with them forever, to not react every time something happens, is to learn to tune in, notice the, if you feel yourself, freezing, getting embarrassed or something at something that, someone asks you a question or something happens, tune into your thoughts and learn to listen to the, well, no one has to hear what I have to say. Learn to identify what that belief system or that thought is that's running through your mind as you're feeling that feeling of being flustered. And as you tune into that, as you feel the emotion, you allow it to flow, you allow it to dissolve. Again, over time, if we imagine slowly emptying this jar of rocks every time something were to trigger you, if you allow yourself to feel it, then you make space for your soul to come back in. And then you start to feel better and better over time, the more that you do that. And you start to react less over and over because you have less rocks that are getting hit. You start to raise your default vibration. We talked a little bit about that last week as well. And so this is a continuous process of checking yourself, checking your behaviors, understanding, tuning into your body, feeling the painful feeling, the emotion that was triggered, allowing yourself to feel it. And then again, over time, you react less and less the more that you learn to do that.
And let me ask you, how long
Mm-hmm.
does it normally take to start seeing a change
Mm-hmm.
in a pattern in something that we've been stuck with?
Oh, mm-hmm. It can be, so these things can be multi-layered, but if you hit it right, you can certainly see a change in the next time that happens. So I've had examples from my own life where I was really upset when I was picking up toys for the kids. And when I noticed that I was really upset and I allowed myself to feel it the first time, then I noticed the next time that I had to pick up toys, I was not as upset about it. There was still something eventually that triggered me to go back in and get the next layer of that. But certainly if you catch the energy that's behind the reaction, then you can feel it almost right away for that one, for anything that might be similar.
And the fact that you've been doing this now for how long? I mean, technically professionally, I mean, you had this
Mm-hmm.
intuitiveness
Yep.
obviously your whole life, but
Yep.
it was after you had your own kids is when you decided this is like, wow, it came to you.
I've probably been doing this work only for the last 3 years or so. I didn't find this right away.
Uh-huh.
After I had the realization that I wanted to work on my behaviors, it was 3 years ago that I started learning about energy, learning about healing, and that was really what accelerated my progress in all of this.
Mhm.
Before that, it would be, well, just do the conscious pause. And so I would pause before I would react, and my head would say, well, I'm not supposed to yell right now, but then I would yell anyway because
Yeah,
I
well,
hadn't, I hadn't diffused the trigger behind it.
exactly. And, you don't have to give us all the details about it, but I think as
Hmm.
parents, we've all been here.
Yeah.
We've overreacted in a sense, but is there any other more recent situations that this happened again with your children?
Yesterday. Yes. So yesterday my kids are in a state where they are just hurting each other. And I don't part of me is sad for each of my kids as they're hurting each other, but what I've also learned to do is as they're doing it, I can either I know that I've gotten to it when I can look at it from a place of neutrality and
Mm-hmm.
and and teach them or give them the whatever lesson I need to
That.
give them.
Mm-hmm.
But yesterday, as they're sitting hurting each other, I'm getting really flustered and reactive, and
Yep.
the thought going through my head was, man, I wish my son would just stop torturing her. And so, whatever that was, I realized that there was some energy in me that was getting triggered because of him hurting her. And so I allowed myself, man, I'm an ugly crier when I really hit something that's in there deep, but I allow it because I know that crying is release. And as I allow myself to feel the emotion, as I allow myself to cry and release it, then I can come back and look at it a little bit more with a clear space. And instead of yelling, instead of, I'm sure we've done it, which is terrible, but you'll give them a little swat and say, stop hitting them. And it's like, well, why am I giving you the swat to tell you to, that's a terrible example, but that's what a lot of us do as moms and as parents when we feel helpless in the situation. And so as I have learned to diffuse that situation, learn to diffuse the energy behind that, then I can come at them from a more compassionate perspective. I can teach my daughter how to be in the situation. I can teach my son. And as we know, kids need repetition over and over and over. And so now it's going to be us repeatedly talking about what is acceptable behavior. But at least now I have worked to diffuse the reaction so that instead of me again reacting, I can teach from a more compassionate place.
I got to give you an example. I was with my kids. I took them
Mhm.
to, Legoland over the weekend, and they're 5 and
Mhm.
7, and they're in the back seat. The drive there, the stress of them poking, pivot at each other, prying at
Mhm.
each other, one crying, screaming. I want to just scream, and I do.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't control it. It's
Yeah.
so annoying. It's so obnoxious. And then after I react, and I'm like, okay, now they see my behavior. Now that's why they're going to
Mhm.
keep acting this way, because they see their mom flip out. I'm like,
Mhm.
it's a
Yeah.
sick cyclic cycle that I
Yeah.
just don't know, even as a parent, how to make that stop, because
Mhm.
it's always, I mean, it's not always easy for us.
No.
So now give us
No.
some advice if we're,
Mhm.
triggered by an emotion and stuff. What can we do to
Mhm.
like dissolve it?
Mhm. The first thing, sometimes, but you don't always have to do this. Sometimes I find that it's really helpful to find the thought underneath the thought. So sometimes I might be yelling at the kids, but underneath is the thought, the no one is listening to me. And that's really the painful belief that I want to understand and diffuse. And so the first thing would be, if you can identify, is there something beneath the thing, a thought beneath sort of what's going on that you can identify? If not, I would visualize the situation. So when I'm out of the situation, oftentimes when it's still fresh, so within a couple days, what I would do in your situation would be to go to my quiet space. I would bring the situation
Hi.
back up in mind.
Hmm.
And then I would allow myself to really feel. So, feel where in my body do I feel that tension or that whatever that pressure is, and then I would tune into that space in my body, and then I would imagine it getting bigger and bigger, and I would breathe into it until and feel it. I would immerse myself totally in that feeling until I felt it dissolve. And then what I typically do is, wherever that block was that I could feel in my body. I imagine, is there like a cord tying this somewhere to my body? This is all visualization. You can't do this wrong. I cut the cord so that way I feel that block drop into the earth, and then I replace it with just bright light, what I imagine spirit to be. And so with energy, energy doesn't like a void, and so it will fill in with something. And so I always like to make sure that I fill it back in with spirit. So for you, bring the situation back to your mind. Just really put yourself back in that car seat, in that driver's seat. Allow yourself to feel it until you feel that wave and that pressure dissolve.
All right, so it's possible to overcome.
It is
Okay.
possible.
And when do
Yes.
you really know though when you really hit a rock?
Yeah. I so many times reacting, that's a big one. So think of when you think of fight, flight, or freeze. So fight, I think of you want to react, you want to yell, you feel, your hands sort of swell up. Flight, you just want to run away, or you might want to shrink down, you might be embarrassed, you might want the feeling to go away. Or again, freeze is very similar. So whenever you feel reactive, whenever you might feel nervous or scared, I've learned to tune into my body. That's where meditation has helped me. I can tune in, and I know what my body feels like in neutrality, and I know what my body feels like when I've hit a rock. And when I've hit a rock, then I allow myself to again make it bigger, feel it, allow it to express and flow out of my system.
Got it. But now let me ask you, how, for someone out there who's listening and who's going through this type of situations, like all of us,
Yep.
what are you supposed to do right away? You're supposed to think before you react. Is there's like a count 1, 2, 3? What can we
hmm
do?
In the moment, if you can stop yourself, and I know it takes training to even be able to stop yourself. I have noticed in the moment before, just taking deep breaths. And if you can, pause before you react. Even in that moment, take deep breaths and allow yourself to do just what I mentioned. Find that spot in your body that feels the pressure and allow it to grow bigger, express, flow, if you can, or just get yourself out of the situation, take some deep breaths, do whatever you need to do. If you have the sort of the discipline to pause. The other thing I would offer parents is to just be gentle on yourself. Give yourself a lot of grace, because we haven't been taught a lot of these techniques. We haven't thought about how can we, we grew up in the sort of fear and control era, and so many of us learned to yell. We learned to discipline, and so give yourself just a lot of grace and patience as you're learning new behaviors.
Patience. Patience is key. My goodness. And let's
Yes.
just,
Yep.
oh my gosh. And it's so hard because, a lot of us don't have that as moms, but you're
Yep.
working with moms now all over, right? All over the
Yes.
world at this
That's
point.
the goal. Yeah.
And what about the dads? Do some dads get involved? Do some dads also get coaching in a sense?
If dads were up for it, they certainly could. I speak to moms just from a marketing perspective, because it's helpful to talk to your target audience. But if there were dads that resonated, I would certainly be interested in working with them as well.
Right. And if we want to reach out to you,
Yep. Andree, ANDREE.com. It has my email. You can download 3 ways to tap into the Authentic You PDF, which then puts you on my email list. And that would be the best point of contact.
perfect. And we still have just 2 minutes left in the
Mm-hmm.
show. What else in particular did you want to leave with everyone?
Yeah, I would just love moms to know that it's possible. I came from a place where I had kids and I didn't think I could feel any emotion. I thought I had a heart of stone. I was reactive, I was unhappy, but it's possible for all of us to get to a place, because like I mentioned before, we all have that same energy of spirit running through us, that spirit of peace, that spirit of joy. It's there for all of us. We just have to sift through to get there. And so I want to offer to moms that it's work that we all have to do on our own. No one can save us. No one can do this for us. But that doesn't mean you have to do it alone. That's why I'm here to support moms. And so
Aw.
we are all here. We have to take accountability of our own lives, but you don't have to try to figure this out all by yourself.
Aw, thank you so much. You're not
Thank
alone. And how
you.
can we reach out to you one
Yes.
more time? Remind us.
Yep. Andrea, Andree, 2e's.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And looking
Thank you.
forward to the next time we get to speak. And thank you for going over this for
Absolutely.
us and to let everybody know it's okay. It can happen to all of us, but
That's right.
we'll get
Yep.
through it. Thank you
That's
so
right.
much,
Thank you,
Andrea. I
Jill.
appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned. This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.